eBay Motors and Fox Racing welcome you to episode 72 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. This week I speak with former Cycle World and Road and Track writer Peter Egan on the occasion of the publication of his new book, Landings in America. The book's subtitle sums it up. It reads, 2 people, 1 summer, and a Piper Cub. And no, a Piper Cub is not a motorcycle, but rather an airplane. But even if you're ambivalent about flying, as I am, the book is a charmer. Egan, easily one of the best ever to write about motorcycling, is just as adept spinning a yarn about traveling around America in a primitive, underpowered aircraft. And of course, we talk motorcycles. I couldn't resist. But first, some words from those who pay our bills. Yes, it's the lowdown. eBay has reinvented vehicle buying. From click to curb, everything's covered. With their new secure purchase, eBay isn't just where you find your car, it's where you buy it, start to finish. Title, financing, registration, delivery, it's all built in. And eligible vehicle purchases are backed by up to $100,000 in protection. This is what modern car buying looks like. Get your next ride on eBay. eBay, things people love. Secure purchases powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary. In over 50 years of connecting riders to dirt, Fox Racing has learned that the best gear always has a discernible purpose and a strong point of view. The Ranger Defend and Recon Adventure Collection takes a minimalist approach to product design, with a clear mission of providing everything you need in adventure-ready gear and absolutely nothing you don't need. Minimalist chassis, fully seam-sealed with Gore-Tex waterproofing and D30 CE level protection across the board. This gear is every bit as pure as the adventure you're chasing. I'm very much a terra firma person, so I didn't really understand the Piper Cub. And I found that once I read your explanations of the Piper Cub, I went ahead and sort of made this, I equated it to things that I understood, motorcycles and vehicles. Mm-hmm. And because I thought an airplane was just something you were very cocooned in and that's the kind of flying I'm used to. But of course, the Piper Cub is a very different animal. And a lot of it reminded me of traveling in my VW bus, where you're perpetually in everyone's way. There were a few instances where you were landing and there were pilots in other planes just wanting you to get the hell out of the way. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to think of the motorcycle equivalent to a Piper Cub. And here's what I came up with. And then I'm curious to hear what you would think. To me, it was like a 350 English single, like a post-war 350 English single, not really kind of perpetually underpowered. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, it is. I had a Triumph 500. It was just a trophy, and I'd ride it into Madison once in a while from where we live. And you get on a 4-lane highway briefly on Highway 14, and you get people behind you, especially at rush hour or something, who are right on your tail light. And you really don't want to ride that, an old Triumph 500 any faster than about 65, and everybody 75 or 80. And you really feel, you're holding up traffic. And it's nice to have a motorcycle that keeps up with traffic. And I've had, I had a Bridgestone 50 for my first bike and rode long distances with it to go see a girlfriend in a faraway town where she was staying for the summer. And I essentially had to go down the shoulder almost like I was on a bicycle. Going 35 miles an hour. Cars would come, speeding up behind you and not know what to do. And so I thought I'd really hit the big time when I got a Honda Super 90 that would go 53 or 54 miles an hour, 55 maybe, flat out. But I could actually get into the middle of my lane and be going fast enough that I wouldn't be rear-ended by traffic. And then I went to a Honda 160, and I really had it made because it would go about as fast as I wanted to go. So
it was the 160 was gratuitous after the Bridgestone.
Yeah.
But why the Piper Cub? What's the resonance of that plane for you?
I think it's just the history of the plane and how it looks. It's a classic airplane, and they were available as well. They made a lot of them during World War II and after the war. It was a huge selling plane in 1946, which was a boom year for small airplane production. Mm-hmm. They're getting up there in price now. They're getting apparently fairly valuable because they're considered a classic. almost like having an MGTC. Not a lot of performance, but they look so good, and they're such a part of history that people love to look at them and have them and drive them. So I think a lot of the Cub was just historical resonance, and I also like the fact that the side door opened. We could sit one behind the other and fold the door down and the window up, and the whole side of the airplane is open. So you can really see the ground better from a Piper Cub than you can even in a Stearman biplane or something, because you're looking down at the passing earth below. And you can look, it's just like having a door off a Jeep or something. It's
yeah.
You can look down at the road if you want to.
And the controls are, I mean, there were two sets of controls, because you did the trip with your wife, Barb, and she is also a pilot as you are.
Mm-hmm.
Was that because was it designed as a trainer? Is that it?
Yeah, well, it was meant to be flown out of the back seat. If you fly the Piper Cub solo, in order to have the correct balance and have your weight in the right place, you're supposed to fly it out of the back seat. So if I'm flying by myself, I automatically get in the back seat, and the front seat is really intended for passengers, and so it's a little more cramped, and it's actually a little bit harder to see out the side where when you're taxiing, where the airplane is going, and even to see the ground. When you're sitting back farther, you get a wider view of the ground going by in the horizon, and so it's meant to be flown out of the back seat. And I had a friend who had an L4, an Army Cub, like ours was originally, and I would go flying with him and sit in the front seat. And you can fly it out of the front seat. He would let me take over and fly for a while, but I'm 6'1", so I was a little bit cramped, and your knees are a little more up in the air. You're
right.
close to the panel, so it's just more comfortable sitting in the back seat if you're a larger, taller person.
And its construction is very rudimentary because it is cloth covered, is it not?
Yes, it is. It's fabric. Most people use Seconite now. I think originally it was a type of linen that was used on it. And they put Seconite fabric on it and then shrink the fabric with a chemical that shrinks it up and makes it tight and stiff. And then you paint it. So it had a steel tube frame, almost like an old Formula car. And part of the wing was wood, a wooden spar that goes across the wing, but the rest of it was all metal tubing, and then covered with fabric. And a few places it's covered with sheet metal around the end, and so on.
And I think at some point you said its weight, and I was shocked at this because I think of planes as being large, but it was 670 or 80 pounds.
Yeah, I think that's the empty weight of the Cub.
So it's less. It's considerably less than it's what a lot of motorcycles are more than 670 pounds these days. But certainly, it's a two-thirds of a Goldwing.
It was lighter than my old Road King that I had, and a couple other motorcycles I've owned.
And we must be honest. There were times when it flew about as well as a Road King too. I mean, there's a beautiful moment where you're flying along somewhere and you're following a road, and all the cars beneath on the road are passing you. And I think Barb told you that you were going 32 or 36 miles an hour.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with an airplane is you're always dealing with wind speed. So if you have a headwind, if the airplane will go, say, if you're trying to cruise at 60 and you have a 30-mile-an-hour headwind, you're going 30 over the ground. Your airspeed indication is that you're going 60 or 65, whatever. But the actual distance you're covering over the ground is 30 miles an hour.
Oh, I didn't know that. I see.
Ground speed are two different things depending on the wind.
You took this trip in 1987, and it's taken nearly 40 years for you to come out with a book of that trip. Now, when you did the trip in 87, were you intending to write about it, or was there a plan to do a book that just got pushed off because you were writing about cars and motorcycles, or what's that story?
Well, I was planning to write a book about it, and I took voluminous notes. I carried a small tape recorder in my pocket during the day, and I would note where we were flying, and if I had a thought about the countryside we were flying over, a town, or what we were looking at, I would record it. And then occasionally I would write notes in the notebook. If Barb was flying, I would just let her fly I would have her fly for a while so I could write. And but I made tape recording notes, and then every evening, most evenings we stayed at a motel. We only camped a few times on the trip because of the heat. But when we'd stay at a motel, I would go back to the motel after dinner and probably spend an hour or two transcribing the tape onto my notebook, logbook I had of the flight. And then when we got back to California, back home, I typed them out further. On the weekends, I would type out the notes and expand on them a little bit. And so rather than have a kind of shorthand note. And I had planned to write a book about it, but when I got back, I was working for both Cycle World and Road and Track, and I had to do 2 columns a month and usually 2 feature stories and sometimes more, and there's a lot of travel. And I couldn't bring myself to sit down if I had 1 day a week off when I didn't have to sit at a computer or a typewriter.
Right.
I couldn't bring myself to spend Sunday writing when I'd been doing that all week. And I said, I've just got to put this off till I have more time. I can't. I'm too tired to do the book. And so I had a briefcase, which I have over here, that I had all of the notes typed out. And I had a lot of photographs we had taken, just regular photos with a small camera. And I kept a file. I kept all of the charts that we had taken on the trip, and used a magic marker to show exactly where we went and what time we landed. Barb notated all of that on the charts.
Right.
And then I had, we were subscribed to Time magazine, and I kept all the Time magazines in a file, so I would remember what was going on the week we were in a certain place around the world, just for reference. And so I had a box, a briefcase full of notes, and a box full of records and maps and charts. And I've just carried them around all these years, and I finally retired and decided it was time to sit down and write about the airplane trip.
Had you looked at your notes in the intervening years at all?
Not very much. I dug them out at one point, and Barb read through them. I hadn't looked at them in a long time, and she said, you should just publish the notes as they are, just day by day. And I said, no, it needs a little tidying up from that. But I worked about 2.5 years on the book. It took a while to get it all done. And I did a lot of research working on the book because, we'd fly over a battlefield, and you don't want to just say something quick and possibly wrong about where you're flying. So I would get out a book and read about that battle, or I watched the Last Picture show again because we landed in Archer City, just to see it again and see what they were showing. And I spent a lot of time reading background material for the book when I finally did it.
Right.
But I was kind of glad I did it later rather than the original one was just a travelogue. Today we went here, and doing it 36 years later, I was able to reflect a little more on it. What was special about the place and what had happened in the meantime and so on. So I think it expanded a little bit.
Yeah, that sort of is a nice segue into my next thought, which is that there's a sort of elegiac quality and a memoir quality to it that certainly I don't think it would have necessarily been so strong had you written it, upon your return.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a lot of the people that you discuss in the book, your father, your in-laws, are no longer living. And did that, when you and there's a thing that you do in the book, and you did it really well, and I think it's deceptively difficult when you're writing to sort of move back and forth, because there was a beautiful scene where you're discussing visiting your in-laws in northern Wisconsin, and we're in that moment, and it's the 80s, and then all of a sudden, I think it was your mother-in-law was on a dock smoking a cigarette, and you wrote how beautifully happy they seemed to be. Mm-hmm. In that moment. And then, of course, you let us know that, we realized that they've been gone for so long. So there is this kind of moving back and forth in time, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. I think that would have been a missing element if I had written it as a. I wrote a fair number of travel stories for Cycle World and Road and Track, and they were just okay. Here we went on this trip last week, and this is what we found, and that's a fun way to do the story too. But I don't think it's quite as reflective as looking at it later and thinking about the people you visited.
Well, there certainly is a resonance, and I couldn't help but think, because the Oliver North trials were going on at the time that you were traveling, and in light of current political events, it seemed almost quaint. We thought it was the end of the world at the time, of course, but
Yeah, things things can get worse as we have.
Well, you've in as a devoted reader of yours, more Cycle World than Road and Track, I must confess. But you steer clear of politics, but you do get a few little choice comments into. I think we can determine where you stand about the state of the world these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of it was about the Vietnam War. I joined the Army. I didn't get drafted. I quit school, which I mentioned in the book.
Yes.
Decided to change my major to pre-med and realized I was too dumb to get through the physics biochem. And so I just got up out of a lab one day and walked down the street and joined the Army. And my parents were not particularly happy. But all of my roommates and most of my friends were very anti-war, and they were just stunned that I was doing this. And I really did it out of selfish motives. I thought, well, I would like to be a writer, and I pictured myself as possibly being a war correspondent someday, and having two Nikons around my neck and jumping out of a helicopter to cover America's adventures overseas. And I thought it would be good. I should know about the Army. I should see what it's like and experience it, and have that background rather than just being a visitor to the the war, as it were. And so I had it was really kind of a journalistic adventure for me to go in the Army, but I was never convinced in Vietnam. I was very sympathetic to the South Vietnamese who were opposed to communism, because many of them had fled the North, and now they were fighting again have freedom of speech and freedom of religion and so on. But I could see that it wasn't working very well, that the strategy we were using and the politics there were such a mess. I just didn't feel very confident about what was going on.
The Lowdown Show is presented by adbwriter.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. I never really understood the lure of flying as a small plane to travel. And I always thought that there would be this, because most of my trips are on the ground, on a motorcycle or some sort of wretched old vehicle. And I always thought that flying would be this sort of isolating aspect. And I think you wrote in the book that, flying is less visceral and more observational. And of course, you've done lots of road trips everywhere on all sorts of vehicles. What is it about flying above that is that tells you what you can't get from being on the ground?
Well, I think I hate to use the word overview, but that's what you're getting of the country. You're seeing more of the geology and the nature of the country. You miss, as I wrote in the book, you miss a few things because between fuel stops, you can have whole changes of culture and changes of accent and so on. And you aren't stopping at gas stations and truck stops necessarily and interacting with people. But each night when you get to where you've gone for that night, you have time to walk around town and talk to people and think about where you've been and where you are. And I think it's just an adventure. I like the idea of flying for the same reasons I like motorcycling. Is you're more dependent on the weather, and you're more in the atmosphere than you are driving a car, for instance, or just commercially flying. We had the door open and the window open the whole time, so you're in the wind. You're experiencing the temperature. We didn't have air conditioning. It was somewhat noisy. We had headsets on, but it's it's kind of like a motorcycle. I mean, if it's a windy, rainy day, it might not be a real good day to be traveling very far. You're much more dependent on the weather.
Well, there were a few instances when you literally couldn't get it off the ground. You'd land somewhere in the middle of the day, and the heat and the weather conditions just weren't conducive to getting off the ground. Correct?
Yeah, that was a problem with our Piper Cub. It's a 65 horse engine. And of course, a lot of the West is the airports are at fairly high elevation and the air is thin. And so the engine was not performing. We had a very old fashioned engine, the original style in the airplane, that it had no mixture control. So the higher the elevation and the hotter it was, the thinner the air was, and everything, the engine ran too rich. So it flew pretty well up to about 3,000 feet. And then above that, a couple of the places we flew through a pass, we had to climb to 7,000 feet and then swoop down through the pass. And it took a long time to get to 7,000 feet because the engine just does not run well above 5,000 feet. And so that was kind of a slow process. I'm not sure I'd want to do that again over the mountains. I love flying the Cub, but it was a little arduous getting over some of the passes.
It did sound a little harrowing, I have to say, and I'm guessing you were sort of downplaying it, but I think there were a few butt clenching moments because you essentially had to sort of spiral up to a certain altitude, did you not, to make these? And it also determined the route of your trip, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. I wrote in the book that when we flew through El Paso, I finally realized why it was called El Paso, because it's a low pass through the Rockies. And that's why it was a wagon route for pioneers going west and many other people, a highway route and so on. But it was it was easier flying once we got into central Texas and the hill country, because we were taking off from airports that were anywhere from sea level to 3,000 feet. But you can land at airports in Arizona or New Mexico where you're landing on a 4,000 foot or 3,000 foot runway, and it's very hot out, so the air is thin, and effectively you're at 7,000 feet, almost like you're on a mountaintop.
Right.
It took a while. This airplane really drove home the value of computing density. It's called density altitude. It's how dense the air is where you are relative to heat, humidity, and altitude and elevation. And so that became a prime consideration.
The one thing also too that was really powerful in the book was sort of I felt the tension. You wrote it so beautifully that I felt the tension sort of settle in. I think it was in the Everglades, and then again when you got to northern Wisconsin, where we were going through heavily wooded areas. You sort of always had one eye on the ground on where you could set down if worse came to worse. And at one point, your plane actually started running on 3 cylinders.
Mm-hmm.
So this wasn't just sort of this arbitrary, fearful thing. I mean, it was a real concern, wasn't it?
Yeah, it does happen. And as I wrote in the book, when you're taking flying lessons, it's fairly common for your instructor to suddenly close the throttle and say, your engine just stopped. What are you going to do? And then you look and you're over a town, and you have to think very quickly, if this happened, what you would do. So you're always looking at the ground and thinking about possible landing areas. And so when you go over northern, like the Florida Panhandle is very heavily wooded. And we flew for probably an afternoon or a whole day over part of the Panhandle. And you look down, there's really no place to land. The only place that's open and not wooded are the highways and maybe the interstate. And even those have trees growing over the edge. And so it's always kind of a relief when you get into slightly more open country that have farm fields and hay fields and pastures and a little more open because, if the engine stops in an airplane and you're over the woods, you're just out of luck. You're going to have to try to keep it flying and glide and land as gently as possible in a treetop. And a Piper Cub, because it's a slow, lightweight airplane, can probably do that a little more. It's probably a little more survivable. But if you're in a fast, heavy airplane, you're just down in the woods. So it's nice to fly over open territory sometimes.
And also your navigation technique, which I would not have thought of before I read your book. You used a lot of the sort of the public roads as a way to determine where you were going, didn't you?
Yes, yes. We didn't have any electrical navigation equipment at all. We didn't have the planes at that time. It was before GPS, but planes had VOR navigation, where they have a radio that picks up different radio signals from towers, and you can match it tells you what radial you were on out of 360 degrees from that tower, and you can see that you were on the the 90-degree radial, and then cross that with another one and find out where you are. It's not too hard to do, but it takes a little time. But obviously, when you're flying a light plane like this, it's a lot easier to look down and say, okay, that's I-10 over there. And as long as we follow I-10, it's going to go where we want to go. And sometimes we got away from the highway, but we often kept some major highway in view in the distance, just so we didn't get confused and say, okay, where are we now?
eBay has reinvented vehicle buying. From click to curb, everything's covered. It's all thanks to their new secure purchase. Ever try to buy a car and end up in a parking lot with a stranger and some blind trust? Or spend half the day at the dealership talking to pushy salespeople and signing paperwork? Or maybe, worst of all, waiting for hours at the DMV just to transfer the title? Well, that era is over. For years, eBay has been the go-to for gearheads, collectors, and do-it-yourselfers. Because whatever you're into, from classics to SUVs to trucks to imports, eBay's got it. And now with secure purchase, eBay isn't just where you find your next ride, it's where you can buy it, start to finish. Sellers and titles are verified, paperwork is handled by experts, and payments are traceable and digital. So you know exactly who you're dealing with and exactly what you're getting. Plus, you can finance, insure, and register your vehicle all in one place. No more hours at the dealership, no more trips to the DMV. Get your vehicle plates and paperwork shipped to your door, ready to drive. And it's all part of one seamless process designed to feel as easy as buying anything else online. And eligible vehicles purchased on eBay are backed by up to $100,000 in purchase protection. Thinking about selling your ride? Secure purchase makes that simple too, because you know your buyer and their funds are verified. If you still owe in your car, the financing payoff is fully integrated, so you're not chasing paperwork or waiting on checks to clear. And with secure purchase, you get paid fast. And you're not going to be stuck chasing no-shows or answering the fifth, "Is it still available?" message. This is what modern car buying looks like. Skip the DMV, skip the sketchy meetups. Buy it on eBay. eBay, things people love. Secure Purchase is powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary. In over 50 years of connecting riders to dirt, Fox Racing has learned that the best gear always has a discernible purpose and a strong point of view. The Ranger Defend and Recon Adventure Collection takes a minimalist approach to product design, with a clear mission of providing everything you need in adventure-ready gear and absolutely nothing you don't need. Minimalist chassis, fully seam-sealed with Gore-Tex waterproofing and D30 CE level protection across the board. This gear is every bit as pure as the adventure you're chasing. The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. We're talking about the idea, had you written the book, just as soon as you've done the trip versus waiting 35 years to do it. I mean, one of the things that it really becomes is a sort of a treatise on technology, isn't it? Because, there were no cell phones, and there were, occasions where you'd land somewhere and as you wryly pointed out, everything looks closer together when you're in the air, and then you land and you realize that airstrip is actually 2 miles to town, and you and Barb would just have to hoof it into town. I mean, did writing the book make you rethink the sort of onslaught of technology that we've had in the intervening years?
A little bit, yeah. I didn't mind it at the time. I mean, it's so much easier now to use GPS, which shows you exactly where you are, assuming everything works. But it wasn't really very difficult. We didn't have too much doubt about where we were going. And as I mentioned in the book, when you're, especially in the West, there are very few roads or railroads that don't go somewhere important, or rivers for that matter. If you're following a river or a railroad, it's going to go into some major city pretty soon. So you know that you're going somewhere. You aren't just flying cross country randomly and getting more and more lost. So highways are useful. people talk about, VFR flying or IFR flying, which means instrument flight rules, but people joke that it also means I follow roads or I follow railroads.
That was it.
Follow
Did the trip give you a different sort of understanding of America? You and Barb were fairly young. You were in your late 30s at the time. Did you glean anything that you hadn't gleaned from riding your CBF 400 Honda or your Triumph Twin around?
Not really, I don't think. One thing we realized is that having the Piper Cub, which was a recognizable classic old airplane, made it a lot easier to meet people. And I think when you're riding a motorcycle or driving an old car, that's interesting. If you're riding a Vincent and you'll stop at a gas station, somebody will come up and say, "What is that?" Or "That's a beautiful Vincent," or "Where did you get it?" Or, people are curious. Or, any classic motorcycle. But if you're just flying a Cessna, a production airplane, a Cessna 150 or something, it's just another airplane that landed. But when you land with a Piper Cub, very often 2 or 3 people would walk out of their hangars and come over and to look at the airplane and see where you came from. And then when they realized how far you were from home, they would offer to help drive into town or help you find a motel or to advise you on restaurants. Or in a few cases, they even said, "It's going to storm tonight. Why don't you put that nice old airplane in our hangar?" And so I think just people identify with something that has a little bit of charm and history to it. Whether it's, I think that's true of cars and motorcycles as well. I drove across the United States once from Wisconsin to California in a Model A Ford, and you can't stop at a restaurant in a small town without having 3 or 4 people come out with a cup of coffee and look at the car and ask where you're going and why you're driving that old car out in the middle of nowhere. And they're always helpful people who invite you to do something, or "You've got to come back and see my Model A in my garage," and that kind of thing. So I think the old airplane factor helped a lot in meeting people.
Did you fly a lot after this? This is something I wondered. Did it was such a, I mean, in the heat that we've been having this summer, as I mentioned before we started, I spent the last 3 days at a racetrack in 95-degree heat. And of course you flew in a very hot summer and you planned to do more camping. And in fact, it's a great shot on the cover of the book. It's actually a beautifully designed book. But it's not wholly accurate, is it? Because you are the tent under the wing looks romantic, but the reality was not quite that romantic, was it?
No, that was the. It looks very nice, but that was the night we had a gang of yahoos come in and drive a pickup truck around our tent and shine the headlights into the tent, and they were essentially pretty drunk. They heard we were there, and I had to get out of the tent and start walking toward the truck, and they drove away, and there's a whole load of like 4 or 5 guys in the back of the truck drinking beer, and so it wasn't real comfortable, and it was a very hot night. But the heat was a real problem. The summer we did this trip in 1987 was one of the hottest up to that point that I remember, and just as also when you're on a motorcycle, it's the same thing. If you're riding through heat, if you're crossing Arizona in hot weather on a motorcycle, the last thing you really want to do at the end of the day is stop and put up a tent. Done it, but it's much nicer to go to a motel and turn the air conditioner on and take a shower and then find an air-conditioned restaurant than it is to start a campfire.
Because it was sort of the standard for you and Barb to fly to a place, get into town, find a motel, and then just, you literally collapsed, didn't you?
Yeah, we're pretty tired. We started flying early every day on the trip because the air is cool. The air is calmer in the morning, and especially in the west and also in the southeast coast, you get afternoon storms in the east, and you get afternoon winds, dust devils, and little twisters and so on in the west very often. As things heat up, the atmosphere gets less stable. So we found most days it was a really good time to land around 3 o'clock, because the weather usually got way too hot or way too windy, or there were big thunderclouds building up. And so we often would land about 3 o'clock, but at that point you've been flying for 6 or 7 hours, and it's a lot of noise and heat, and just as it would be on a motorcycle, and wind. And so it feels really good to just stop and go lie down for a while and take a nap and cool off. And you don't tend to stay up real late and take off again.
You know, it's like those old biker films that we used to watch. You know, they'd get somewhere and raise hell in town, and it'd be like, I'd be asleep at 9:30. I could never live that lifestyle, just because, you know, after riding some of the old bikes I've had, it's just like, oh my God, give me a mattress.
Yeah. Well, we didn't stay up. We didn't go to bed real early or anything. We'd usually walk around towns, and I'd write a lot of notes, but we always slept well after a day of flying.
Did you fly a lot after this, Peter? I know that you and Barb did the trip, and you of course you couldn't go up over the Rockies. You sort of had to take a southwestern trip through Texas and so on. And after the trip was over, did you ever do anything quite like this again?
No, we didn't. As Barb said, we didn't fly for a couple of weeks after we got home, really, because we had a lot of work to make up. We had jobs we had to go back to, and some backlog of work. And Barb said, I think we should just give it a rest for a few weeks. We've used up all of our luck. And we finally went out and went flying again a couple of weeks later. But we didn't trust the airplane entirely at that point, because we've been having that engine problem where the motor would drop. And it was time to restore the airplane. So we had this guy up in Northern California, Russ Harmuth, come down and pick up the airplane and disassemble it and put new fabric on and rebuild the engine. And then after we got it back, we flew quite a bit, but locally in California. We would just fly up and down the coast, or around Corona, over Lake Elsinore, that area. And
it's a beautiful place, yeah.
Yeah, so we did quite a bit of flying. And then when we moved back to Wisconsin 3 years later, Barb flew back with our cats and dog. And then I made a couple of runs in our van with a trailer with motorcycles and one car. And then my friend Pat Donnelly and I flew the Piper Cub back to Wisconsin. And we kept it at a small airport. It's about 11 miles from where we live now. And we flew the airplane for about 3 years. And then it was snowed in quite a bit in the small airport. And we had bats in the hangar that were defecating on it, and I had to keep the airplane covered and get the mice out of the engine. And
right.
So we finally sold the Cub. We decided it'd be better for the airplane to go to somebody with a heated hangar and a concrete airstrip. We sold it to a man who I think was in Ripon, Wisconsin. And after that, we just rented airplanes. I like flying Citabrias, which is it's a two-place aerobatic airplane that's very agile and has 150 horsepower, so it climbs well. So I rented those for several years after we sold the Cub. But we aren't flying now. I'm 77 years old, and I don't really. I've had a couple of medical issues that would probably make it a little hard to get a pilot's license. But
one of the things that I think there were a lot of parallels, I think, for those listeners to this. It's a great travelogue, and you really don't have to have that much of an interest in airplanes for it to resonate. Because I think a lot of the sort of the central tenets of travel resonate with motorcycles and with flying. And one of the things in particular, Peter, you talked about that sort of urge to keep going, that even though you're exhausted and the days, and of course you were on the road in the air for about 6 weeks, but you just want to keep going, don't you? There's that, if you hang around a town too long after a day or two, you feel that urge to move again, and that the movement itself becomes almost an addiction, doesn't it?
Yeah, you become a kind of gypsy, I think, mentally. After a while, you say, okay, we've been here for 2 days. That's enough. We need to get back in the air. This is what we do, is we fly every day. and everything else is an interruption. And of course, we had a fairly loose time schedule, but we knew we could take 6 weeks off, but we had to keep thinking, okay, we've been flying for 3 weeks and we're in Kitty Hawk, on the East Coast, or we're in Pennsylvania now. So what does that mean in terms of how long it's going to take us to get back if we visit our friends in Wisconsin? And so you're always there's background planning going on. And you get a little restless when you spend too long on the ground and think we got to get moving again. It's very nice here, but we need to move. So it's fun just to get back in the airplane. It becomes a routine, and you're used to being there. And it's fun, fun to fly and see more of the country.
One of the most, I think, moving passages of the book for me was your sort of ode to the Wright brothers, and you visited where they did their flights. Mm-hmm. And that it seemed to, and you mentioned at one point that you got quite emotional, and you, as a Midwesterner, you were not prone to emotional outbursts, but it was actually quite, it was moving for you. And can you just give me a feeling of the significance of the Wright brothers to you?
Well, I'd read a number of pretty good biographies of the Wright brothers, and what struck me is their resilience, and they just stuck with it. I mean, there was a lot of discouraging people and discouraging events and so on. And people who were trying to fly at that time were sometimes portrayed as just crazy. It's not going to work. Nothing works. And but they just stuck with it. They're very logical. They read everything they could find out about that other pioneers had discovered about flying. And then, as I wrote in the book, they realized some of it was wrong, that the airfoil designs were not as good as they should be, and the propeller designs were not as good as they should be. And they're very persistent, and they just kept at it. And they had a very good engine builder, too, a machinist who worked with them. And their father, who was a bishop, helped them and was very supportive. I think and they had a sister who was very bright and helped work on the airplane and design the fabric for it and so on. And so they had a good family who were very rooted in the area, and they read everything. They were all avid readers and very smart people. And but I think it's the persistence that's moving for me, because they had to go to a lot of trouble to get to Kitty Hawk and Kill Devil Hills, and they had to write letters to find out where the best place was for consistent winds. And then when they found Kill Devil Hills, they had to ship all this lumber on a boat. There were no building materials out there. They had to ship building materials to the Outer Banks and build their own shed and workshop and house. They stayed in the workshop and ate canned food, and they spent a whole year there doing a whole flying season, essentially doing glider flights, just to try to figure out what they had to do to make an airplane turn and so on. So I think it's just the persistence that
yes,
that sinks in when you read about them.
Now, of course, you have a hugely devoted following, which is still very vibrant today. In fact, when I write something, and if people think it's good, there'll always be one guy that says, "Well, you're not Peter Egan. Don't get carried away." So you have this wonderful following. And how has retirement been to you? You were a car rider and a bike rider, and you were one of the few that could get away with it, of course, because us motorcycle people tend to think that car riders are sort of cheating, and it's not quite right. But you managed to do the two. And how has retirement been treating you?
Retirement, pretty well. I've been indulging in my hobbies a bit. I usually have a winter project in my workshop. A couple of years ago, I spent about 3 years restoring an old Morgan sports car that had been completely disassembled. And last winter, I bought back my old BMW R100 RS. It's a 1984 R100 RS that I had sold to a friend about 16 or 18 years ago. And he wasn't riding it much anymore, and he's got a large motorcycle collection. And so I convinced him that I needed to buy that back, and it it wasn't, it had 100,000 miles on it when I sold it to him, and I bought it back with about 107 on it. So it needed, wheel bearings and steering head bearings and some upgrading. And he had a large motorcycle collection, and it was kind of in the back of the barn. And he was nice enough to sell it back to me. So I spent the winter just putting, new exhaust system and bearings and cables and cleaning it up, getting the mice out of the air cleaner, that kind of thing.
Now, I'm going to give you a hard time here for a second. Now, when you sell a motorcycle, is it a caveat that to whoever buys it, that you have the option of buying it back at some point? Because there's a friend of mine, if anyone ever buys a motorcycle back that they've once owned, he refers to it as pulling an Egan, because you've done that so many times. It seems like you've sold something and then had a change of heart, and then bought it back. I mean, do you have a rough guesstimate on how many bikes you've done that with?
It's quite a few, but I'm very interested in trying new motorcycles and having a new experience. I've never really been a person who wants to have the same bike his whole life, or just one brand of motorcycle. I think it's fun to experiment and see what's out there, and what works for whether you're road racing or doing adventure, riding through Baja. It's nice to try something different. And once in a while, you realize that the KTM 525 you had that you rode in the Black Hills was a really good bike, and there's another one for sale. And so I think part of it is nostalgia, and part of it is if you don't have the space or the money to have a really large motorcycle collection and just have them all lined up, you sell something to try something new, and then later on see that it's for sale again or it's available, and buy it back.
Doesn't the way I think of it is that sometimes and God help me, but I've been looking at Moto Guzzi Eldorados lately, and I don't know what that's all about. But to me, a motorcycle suggests a certain kind of usage, and I think as a motorcyclist, I've raced speedway and flat track and road raced, and then I will go through this phase where I think, well, I just want to slow down and do something different. And it seems like the motorcycle itself, although most bikes are good enough that you can do almost anything on them, there are certain bikes that just, like a sommelier would with wine or something, that just lend themselves to a kind of usage, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah, there's a certain. Well, your Eldorado experience is sort of like, it's probably the same instinct I have with, I've owned about 3 Harley Davidson Road Kings. And if you picture yourself traveling across the Great Plains or the West, and if you want to take a slow, enjoyable sightseeing trip where you aren't attacking corners, it's a relaxing bike to ride. And I think the Eldorado is the same kind of bike. You don't have to be going fast to enjoy being on the motorcycle. It has a lot of personality, and it has tall gearing, and it's relaxed on the highway. And there are other times when you'd like to have a sport bike that you can do a track day with. So I think motorcycles, in my mind, are very much connected with what kind of riding I want to do, and what my future plans are for a trip that I have in mind, and what would be the ideal bike for that trip. I thought of going to Alaska a few years ago, just before COVID hit, and I was shopping for a fairly large dual sport bike of some kind, a GS, or a Honda had just come out with the
Africa Twin,
and then Harley had come out with the Pan America, and so I was weighing all of those, trying to think, because it's a long way from here, from Wisconsin to Alaska, and about 2 weeks to get there, and then Alaska's a big place once you get there, and but then COVID hit, and all of a sudden the border was closed, hotels were closed, restaurants, and so that kind of evaporated. And now I've gotten a little older. That was about 4 years ago, and I don't think I want to ride that distance anymore. I would probably go there and rent something, or even buy something and say in Anchorage or Fairbanks and ride. But also, I'm not as anxious anymore to do real serious single track riding. I've had 2 pretty good crashes in the last 10 years that put me out of commission for a whole summer. And at 77, you really don't need to lose any more summers because, by
Yes.
handlebars. So I'm at this age, I'm starting to like lower and lighter all the time. And so when I picture a long road trip, I'm more in a downsizing mode rather than getting the newest huge adventure bike. Everything I get on these days feels too tall or too heavy for me, and they're bikes I didn't used to think about. I would just get on them and ride, and now I've got a Royal Enfield Himalayan that I like because it's just it's a little lower. And
I was going to ask you about that, and because of a lot of Enfields there's a huge amount of interest now, and I rode in India on an Enfield last year, which in Delhi, which was quite an experience.
yes,
But how do you like the Himalayan?
I like it very well. Everybody points out it could use a little more horsepower, but it's very smooth at 70 miles an hour. So I'm going to a Slimy Crud Motorcycle Club meeting tonight, and I'll probably ride it into Madison because I can go 70 with it, and it's very smooth, and that's fast enough for me, when I'm just going into the city. And it's a very versatile bike. I've got luggage on it. I can go grocery shopping and fill the aluminum panniers with stuff, and it's comfortable. I had a better seat made for it, and I've got 13,000 miles on it right now.
Oh wow, that's a lot.
I have no trouble with it. It's been just a trouble-free, great motorcycle. But
And you also own one of the cafe version of an Enfield, did you not?
what? Pardon me?
Did you own one of the Royal Enfield sort of cafe racers, one of the 650s too?
Yeah,
didn't you?
I did. I had a 650 GT, and I sold it to a friend of mine. And of course, he's showing up at the meeting tonight. Every time he rides in, I look at it and I say, if you ever sell that thing, let me know, because I think I sold it in order to get the money to buy my current Triumph T120. I've got a 1200 Triumph Bonneville, but I think if I had a little more money in the bank, I probably would have just put that in the line of motorcycles that I like to keep.
I don't know how people can own so many motorcycles. I mean, how many? Once I get above about 3, between keeping the batteries charged and oil filters and staying on top of maintenance. I mean, my thing is, if I own the clutch tool for a bike, I'm reluctant to sell it because, well, I have the $54 clutch tool.
Yeah, I do too. I've got a toolbox that has generations of tools that fit certain needs, a lot of British tools, a lot of Whitworth stuff. But right now I've got 3 bikes, and that's a good number for me. I actually use them all and alternate. And there's a certain type of riding that is good for today. The ride I'm planning today, it would be better to take the Royal Enfield. If I'm going farther, I take the Triumph Bonneville or the BMW. In the hot weather, I don't take the BMW very much because it's got a very good fairing, and I don't need that in this summer heat.
So are you telling me that you sold your Bevel Drive 900 Ducati?
Yes,
I thought that was, I think at one point you wrote something where that was the one that was going to stay in the shed forever, but
yeah, I thought it would too. And then I rode it a couple of times one summer, and I thought, I don't use this bike very often. It's a beautiful thing. I love to look at it in the garage, and as a friend of mine is fond of saying, it'll look just as good in someone else's garage if you aren't using it. So I like things that I use more often now. If I'm not riding something, I lose interest in it pretty quickly, especially when I spot something else that I would like to try, and I can realize that I can turn it into instant money and move on.
Well, I have it, and this interview is, of course, about you, but I have to quickly tell you my Bevel Drive Ducati story. I was out in my 916, and I was at a general store not too far from here, where I live, and a man saw the bike, did a U-turn, and pulled up on a 77 900 SS. And we got chatting, and he said, when do you go for a ride? So he gave me his bike, and off I went. and came back 45. He said, "Take your time. I'm going to have lunch." He came back 45 minutes later, and we chatted for a bit and exchanged contact information. And I could never get a hold of him again. It was like this apparition. He showed up out of nowhere, and I could never find him again. I live in a rural place like you do, so there's not a whole lot of them kicking around.
It was the devil. He was trying to make you spend your money. And yeah,
I know what you're going to say. The devil tempting me. I'd been good for a month or two, and he showed up just to prod me.
Yeah, well, they are wonderful bikes, and I think that would be one of probably what I consider the best looking bikes and the most perfect designs in motorcycle history is the bevel drive 900 SS. It's just
they're exquisite. Yeah. No, but I wanted to get onto something else in a minute here. But in terms of bikes, I mean, for me, for years, there was the Vincent Black Shadow was the one to have, and a number of years ago, I rode a very nicely restored Rapide. Probably the most disappointing experience I've had in riding a motorcycle, and I've had lots of experience with Commandos and old Bonnevilles and TR6s and stuff. So I have an understanding of old bikes, but for some reason the Vincent, it just didn't work for me. And you owned a Black Shadow, and then you didn't. And so, what was your experience with Vincent ownership?
I loved riding the bike. The one I had it had been converted and had a Ducati clutch, and the clutch would expand in the heat, and so the clutch was always changing. You would have it adjusted so it worked perfectly when you left your garage, and then an hour later you'd come up to a stop sign and you couldn't get the clutch to disengage, and the motorcycle would try to chug and lurch through a stop sign because you're using the 1952 brakes, and they won't stop the motorcycle. You can't get the clutch to release. So I was always having to fiddle with the clutch. I think the standard one was probably easier to use, but had its fine points and bad points as well, I understand. But also the bike could be very hard to start at times, and after a while I would just I think what happened with the Vincent was I loved the bike and I loved looking at it, but it seemed like on every ride I had to stop and do something. It had a cone-like advance mechanism that would slip, and I would be riding along and all of a sudden it would be backfiring and blubbering, and I'd have to pull over and take a spark plug out and determine what top dead center was with a piece of straw, pluck it down into the spark plug hole, and then timing as close as I could get it and tighten it down again. And so it had a few little things like that could have been better engineered. But I think what caused me to sell it was I realized one day that if I sold it, I could pay off our house. And it was the value of the Vincent turned out to be just about exactly what we owed on our house. And I thought I could probably give this up just not to have to make a monthly house payment. And so I did. And I don't know where the bike is now. I kept track of it through a couple of owners, but I have friends who are Vincent owners who wouldn't part with them for anything. They love them. But I think you have to be dedicated to the idea of having, and that's true of a lot of old bikes, especially British bikes. You have to love the idea of having it, and then you will do whatever it takes to keep it going and make it work. And, if you go through them well enough, sometimes you can make them so you don't have to do anything for a long time. But it's sort of like owning a wooden boat or an older airplane. You've got to pay attention and take care of it. And sometimes that can tire you out.
Well, Landings in America is I believe it's just actually available. I think it's in the next day or two that it goes out that it's available to buy. Do you have anything else you're working on? Or does this kind of wrap it up for you?
No, a few people have asked me what my next book is, and I said, I don't know. right now I feel sort of relaxed and free from having to sit down. I spent a lot of time on this book, and I enjoyed writing it. But it's nice to wake up in the morning and think, if I get the lawn mowed, I can take a motorcycle trip in the afternoon. I don't have any guilt. So I don't have any big writing plans right now. So I'm just happy that I'm very happy that Octane Press decided to print the book, because I was afraid all my notes and pictures and records that I had kept might just end up in a box that somebody would throw away someday. And I really wanted to get it condensed into something that I could remember. And so it was a great relief for me, first, that they wanted to publish the manuscript, and second, I think they did a beautiful job designing the book and putting the pictures in, and with the I had a very good copy editor at the magazine who found my little foibles and errors, and before I had a chance to be embarrassed by them. So I'm just happy to have it coming out and hold it in my hands, and not have it be a forgotten file or forgotten part of my life.
eBay has reinvented vehicle buying. From click to curb, everything's covered. Ever try to buy a car in line and end up in a parking lot with a stranger and some blind trust? Well, that era is over. Now with secure purchase, eBay isn't just where you find your car, it's where you buy it, start to finish. Title, financing, registration, delivery. It's all built in. This is the modern way to buy your next ride on eBay. eBay, things people love. Secure purchase is powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary.